Hello, all you toffees out there. Welcome back to the Blue Frontier. James here, joined by Sean and no Ryan Williams today. He is neglecting his pod duties. Unfortunately, he has family commitments. So, lack of standards for Ryan in regard to this podcast, but we'll let him slide. He'll also be missing the post-match on Saturday, which, please message him and express your fury at his absence. I'm sure he'll really appreciate that. But nevertheless, we persist and we move forward, and we have a really exciting episode for you guys today. We're very interested to get into this one because we've got a different type of show where we're going to try something new. Starting with something that's maybe more familiar to listeners of this show, we're going to look at a comparison of David Moyes' time as Everton manager against Sean Dyche, looking at this season specifically, and compare some of the numbers and how they've changed, and talk about what that means in terms of style of play and what David Moyes has done to be obviously significantly more successful than his predecessor. Then there's been a lot of news today on the Everton front, on the executive front, on the stadium front, all that stuff. So we want to just take some time to address that. And then last but not least, we reached out to our listeners and asked for some questions, and boy, did they come through in a big way. Thank you, everyone who sent questions in, and apologies in advance if we aren't able to get to yours. We got so many, we had to be a little bit selective, but we do want to try to do stuff like this more regularly. So keep the questions coming. And with that, make sure you follow us on socials, join our Discord, and reach out, engage with us. We love all the feedback. So whether it's positive or negative, let us know what you liked about this episode, what you didn't. Leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. We do really appreciate all that, and links to everything will be in the description. I've talked a lot. Sean, before we get going, just a check-in. How are you?
Doing well, James, and excited to do this with you. A little bit sad that Ryan's not here, but I think what Ryan's actually doing is working on spreadsheets and, trying to look at the newest talents in South America, as well as he might have changed his opinions on Ben Godfrey for the last I've heard. So if you want to message Ryan about his opinions on Ben Godfrey and the potential changeover, feel free to do so either on the Discord or socials. But no, James, feeling great. Really excited about the match this weekend. For those that don't know, just because James and I were chatting during the week, the match is 3 p.m. Eastern time, so it is not a morning match. So if you're on the East Coast, make sure that you kind of have your plans ahead, just because, quite a different time frame for the match. But on kind of a side note, really happy for our Muslim players that day, because Ramadan, of course, is in full swing, and so they won't be as parched as they would be on kind of the normal match times. But with that, James, let's kind of get into it.
Yeah, really good point. And so funny, like a 3 p.m. sporting event in America is totally normal, but when it comes to English football, I'm so used to waking up in the morning and having a match to look forward to. I was like, I gotta wait till the afternoon. That's gonna mess up my whole day. That's one of the greatest things about being a European football fan is everything happens in the morning over here. You can watch the matches and be on with your day. But we'll watch it anyway. I'm still very excited. I think it's going to be a really interesting match. But we are going to look backwards on this episode and look at previous matches and analyze some of the numbers. So starting with a contribution from Ryan, despite his absence, we told him the topic of the episode and he couldn't help himself. He had to send us like walls of spreadsheets and screenshots of Excel documents and send us a bunch of really good info. And I would be remiss if I didn't give him full credit for this to introduce the topic. So first and foremost, since Moyes took over on the 11th of January, Everton tied for second in points in the table with Palace and Brighton. Palace have played 8 games. Liverpool, of course, first with 21, but that's with 9 games. Expected points for Everton in 4th place. We know that Everton have been absolutely flying under Moyes. And in addition to that, 3rd in goals behind just Liverpool and Man City. XG for that has been 6th, though. We'll get to some of the XG numbers for sure. 6th in goals, 6th in expected goals against 2. So offense and defense looking really solid. Contrast that with the previous manager, which is what every player refers to him as in their media duties. The previous manager had Everton 17th in expected points, dead last in expected goals, second to last in actual goals, and 5 behind 18th place in goals, that is. Expected goals against was only 10th, and goals against was 7th. So the defense was still decent under Dyche, but it wasn't anything special, and Moyes has obviously elevated the defensive unit quite a bit. So we're going to go through this so I pulled all these numbers off FBref and did comparisons. So all those numbers come from there. Forgive me if any of my math is off. Feel free to check me and criticize me if I did any average calculations wrong. But I'm going to run through them each section and then talk about it a little bit and then move on to the next one, starting with, I think, the first most obvious one kind of to Ryan's comment earlier, points per match is basically doubled. We were at 0.89 points per match, and we've gone to almost 1.9 under Moyes, 15 points in his time. Dyche only achieved 17 in 18 matches. Moyes has done a phenomenal job getting us results. And in going through these numbers, I think it's important to put some context. One, it's a really small sample size, like less than 10 games. You're not talking about anything that's super meaningful, but I just think it's interesting to look at. So take these things with a grain of salt. And furthermore, a lot of these numbers, I think, emphasize the fact that Moyes hasn't changed anything super radically. There are some interesting trends here, but there's nothing that I think, signifies that he's torn up the game plan and started from scratch or anything like that. And I think possession is a good indication of that. We know that Everton are still a team that doesn't love having possession and are in contrast under Dyche, actually doing pretty well without the ball a lot. So possession's gone up from 40.2% to 41.2%. So 1% per game. But interestingly, the expected goals differential, which is expected goals minus expected goals against, minus 0.44 under Dyche. Moyes, almost a full goal swing, positive 0.49. So giving up fewer chances, creating better chances, all that good stuff. The other interesting tidbit on this, that Dyche never managed an XG differential higher than +1 this season. Moyes has already done it twice against Leicester and Manchester United. So just all around better performances, which we all know, it's no surprise, but great to see. And I'm obviously thrilled to be discussing how Moyes has come in and done such a good job.
Yeah, and I think you put it really well, James, but also to add, right, we haven't really had any significant incomings in terms of this kind of period, right? So you look at Charlie Alcaraz, right, of course, just kind of being the only guy, and he has had a role to play, of course, that game winner at Palace, but then also losing Njai, right, in terms of the Liverpool match. But I would also say, too, and I know it's been talked about, we've definitely hit the friendlier part of our schedule, right? So I think on our standpoint, I'm glad we've taken advantage of it, right? Because at the end of the day, you can only win the games that are in front of you. But I think also, too, and we've talked about it before, Moyes has just kind of put the best players in their best positions, right? And it's just like guys like Jake O'Brien, and I know we'll get to it, there are just guys that were not playing minutes under Dyche and were healthy. And so it's kind of a bit of an anomaly when you think about it in regards to, even though Moyes really didn't have a transfer window, he's definitely kind of used some guys that were just ripe for the picking.
And that was one of the things we talked about when he first came in, and kind of one of his calling cards as a manager is he's going to put guys in positions to be successful. And thankfully, he's done that tremendously well. Moving into the shooting category, I think this one is one of the more interesting categories in that Moyes has had the team become a little bit more selective in shot taking. So shots per match are down about 1 per match, but shots on target are up over 1. So we're taking fewer shots, but we're getting them on target more frequently. And that is reflected in the shots on target percentage, which jumped from about 30% to 41%. So gone up quite a bit, quality over quantity there. Overperforming our XG by a significant margin compared to Dyche. Dyche in his games this season, and by the way, this is all Premier League. I excluded the cup matches for consistency's sake. Everton were underperforming their XG by over 5 goals. Moyes, in as few games as he has, plus 2.8 already. So some of that's luck, especially in small sample sizes. You're going to see these fluctuations, but also seeing Beto being the poster child for this, much better finishing from the side.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, you think of like the Derby second goal, right? Of course, just a pinball effect to get the second. So you're going to have, to your point, some luck. But at the end of the day, I think, and we're not like being so clinical on set pieces, right? It's a lot of this is coming from open play, which is a credit to the team, and I think a credit to why you're seeing these XG numbers go up, just simply because it's easier, right, to do that, and it's more reliable. But I think Beto is a great shout, right? Of course, his conversion percentage for a while was super high. So, of course, the Brentford match is kind of just a little bit of a dose of reality, because it's just, of course, he's not going to miss 3 good chances every match, but it happens, right? Especially when he's been as clinical as he has. And so, yeah, I would agree in the sense of, the 8.1 kind of difference is quite alarming. And now the best ways for us, because we're really, starting to really score. I think, I don't think there's been a match we haven't scored under Moyes, right? So, I mean, we're continuing that scoring streak pretty well, and so it is really exciting, especially to your point, James. It's nice for us to be very good in terms of taking care of taking those quality shots and not just kind of huffing it, right? Ghana having a few field goals per game, he's limiting it to about 1 per game now instead of 3 or 4.
Yeah, and that was one of the most frustrating things. I mean, obviously under Dyche, we couldn't create anything, and we had to resort to 25, 30-yard shots that had not a prayer of going in, whereas Moyes has us getting in dangerous positions and converting from those positions. And that's, to your point that you just said, from open play as well. Our non-penalty expected goals points per match, non-penalty XG per match is up like 0.4 per match, which is a pretty significant figure when you think about it. Moving on to goalkeeping, does Moyes have Pickford playing any differently, and is this reflected in the numbers at all? I think goalkeeping's one of those things is kind of hard to isolate. There aren't that many numbers that don't incorporate the entire defensive unit, so I think you have to bear that in mind thinking about these numbers. But shots on target have gone down by over 1 per match, so preventing teams from taking good shots or getting good shots on target. Expected goals against in relation to that is down by almost half. So we've seen our XG go up by almost half a goal per match. Our XGA go down by about half a goal per match, which is amazing. One of the things that I think won't surprise many people, but just the numbers to support it, is the launch percentage of Pickford's passes, which is a launch is defined as a pass that's longer than 40 yards, has dropped by like 8%. It was over half of Pickford's passes were launched previously, and that's come down to just under half, so 46%. Shorter distribution. And in addition to that, what they define as what they call a sweeper action on FBref, which is just the keeper coming out of their box to make a defensive action, whether that be a clearance, a tackle, whatever. Pickford's making fewer of those, about 1 fewer per match. So coming out of goal less and staying closer to home in between the posts. And I think that's reflected in, the more trust in the defense perhaps, but also just not being as aggressive coming out, lower defensive line where he's not relied upon to be super aggressive coming out of the net, which is something we never really talked about Pickford doing that much under Dyche, but in hindsight, I remember him having to be pretty aggressive to make some of these plays coming way out of his net to make some pretty aggressive challenges.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. If you remember the preseason game against Roma, right? We got basically torn apart by them just a few times in the air. And that was a bit of a prelude under Dyche where Tarkowski, right, for so much of the year we were heavily concerned with because it just seemed like he was so slow. And of course, JB not being healthy, right? So Michael Keane was playing a lot of those matches. But I think you said it well, James. In regards to the defensive improvements, it's very easy to see in regards to everybody in the back line, I think, has improved, right? You look at Mykolenko, I think his individual performances have improved. Ashley Young not being right back and Jake O'Brien has been fantastic, right, at a position that he's not familiar with. And I think we've seen a much better version of Tark just because JB's finally been healthy, and I think he's in a system that, puts him at a little bit more ease. And I do agree, you're seeing a lot more playing out of the back with Everton, right? And a lot of these kind of launched balls, right, are probably more to the left or the right, where he sees an opening either to Mykolenko or Jake O'Brien, and he'll let them run with it. So it's really good to see. I think also too, Pickford has a lot more trust in the defense, so he's not going to be coming out as much. We have some pace now with Jake O'Brien, of course, when he's kind of playing central, as well as Doucouré and Ghana always being as helpful as they can be when it comes to those moments. So yeah, it's kind of good to see. I think it will be interesting as the sample size continues to grow, because there are times where I think Pickford now is getting a little bit too settled into being on his line, and we've seen some moments where we've kind of criticized him on goals that we've given up, but still overall just really good to see.
Most definitely, and we'll talk more about Jake O'Brien because I think it's one of the biggest things that Moyes has done, but we'll leave that for later in the episode, so stay tuned for that. Moving into the possession category, we talked about it at the top. Possession hasn't really percentage-wise changed very much, but the things Everton are doing on the ball have changed just slightly in that short and medium passes are more frequent. We're not sending it, and long passes are down. So we're not hoofing it. Hoofball is still sort of prevalent because these numbers haven't shifted dramatically, but it's slightly less prevalent, and I think in a good way. The short and medium passing, higher, but lower completion rate. But the long passes, less frequent, completion rate is way up. It's up I think almost 10% or something like that. Pretty significant increase. So I think we're maybe catching teams off guard a little bit because of that. Lull them to sleep, be a little more patient, and then wait for an opening rather than it being your first option. Just send it at all costs. And I think that's paying dividends. In possession, another stat, again, we're scoring more goals, so naturally assists are way up from 0.37 per match to 1.25. 10 assists for Everton under David Moyes in the Premier League so far. Kind of in the same vein, maybe more of shooting, goal scoring, but passes into the penalty area are down just slightly, and crosses into the penalty area are up just slightly. So we're not getting, and I think that's reflected by in the sense of like taking better shots, being more patient, but we're not necessarily penetrating the defense quite as well or as frequently as we were before. And I think that was kind of interesting, but I'm not reading too much into it because, again, these are like less than 2 total passes into the penalty area and less than 1 total cross into the penalty area. But we've seen better crossing, certainly from the wide areas, I think, under Moyes.
Yeah, and I think when you look at that stat, I mean, I think just the goals that come to mind, right, especially a lot of Beto's goals are they're through balls in space. Right. So you look at the Liverpool goal, you look at even, Leicester was very courteous to give us essentially 3 assists in the first half, just of course with the hoof, that was truly a launch. But then also Garner and just Tarkowski essentially just kind of giving normal through balls that just torched their back line, right? And we've scored a few ways with that, as said before, the Liverpool match. And then you look at kind of the Spurs match, right, where we kind of just really started to show what we could do once we put some of these guys, give NJ space and time. And so, yeah, to your point, James, I think we're not, at a place where like, a guy that I see that would help these stats improve would be like Jesper. But I think overall it's just we're kind of finding a simple way to score, but I also don't think we're going to be relying on it just because I feel like from an open play standpoint, I think we're doing a good job of creating chances.
100%. And good segue because the next topic is goal and shot creation. Really not a whole lot to read into here. Our shot creating actions, which is just a pass that leads to a shot, are down like a little over 2 per match. But again, we talked about fewer shots being taken. Our goal creating actions, we're actually scoring now, jumped by 1.5 per match. So that's pretty great, pretty significant. And dead ball, this is an interesting one. Dead ball, so set piece essentially, goal creating actions from 0.05 under Sean Dyche to 0.25 under David Moyes. So that's a 5x increase. Supports the narrative that we've talked about. We're much better on set pieces under Moyes on executing. And maybe you have to give Charlie Adam a little bit of credit on that.
Yeah, not too much to add. I think you put it pretty well, but it's just that goal creating actions number is just a wild number when you think about it, and just kind of goes to the credit of just Moyes, but then also to the players, because I think they're finally given the creative license, right, to basically be in attack mode without just kind of having to be in the shell.
For sure. Moving on to the other side of the ball, defensive actions. Everton being active off of the ball, which we know we're doing about 60% of the time. Again, this is where we start to peter off, and we only have a couple sections left. But defensive actions. So tackles in our defensive and midfield third are down just slightly, but our attacking third tackles are up quite a bit. So I think that supports sort of being more aggressive higher up the pitch, creating more turnovers. I think there was a stat going around the other day about Everton creating those sort of high turnovers leading to goal scoring chances. Blocks are up about almost 1.5 per game. And then this one just kind of blew my mind. It's just kind of a dorky stat, I guess, but clearances per match. This was like the biggest increase I've seen. Clearances per match in Moyes' tenure have gone up by 14 per match. 7 of our top 10 matches this season with the highest clearances have come under Moyes, and 4 of the top 5 have been under Moyes. Palace, Brighton, Liverpool, and Spurs. I think a lot of that is game state. We've been actually winning games and having to defend leads late, and we've done so tremendously well, and just packing it in the box and clearing it at all costs. But I think it just also reflects sort of Moyes' approach of don't try to get cute with out of the back. Just send it, clear it, push the lines up, and reset the defense. And I think that that's worked extremely well. So I think, again, a lot of this is byproduct of game state, but just the sheer increase in numbers I thought was kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, not too much to add, James. I think game state is like the perfect summary to this, because to your point, if you just looked at it kind of as a naked stat, you'd be like, blocks have kind of increase under Moyes. That makes 0 sense, but it is kind of crazy when you're defending a lead, right? And I feel like that is something that this team's going to have to improve upon, because we are starting to get more of them, right? And I think the United match is a great example of one where we had to be better in closing that out. I think is for us, it's probably going to be something that continues to go up unless we can truly kill games, right? Like the Leicester match. And so, yeah, it's a really good kind of talking point, and it's something that, yeah, it's a interesting stat to analyze, because it's like Dyche is Tarkowski is essentially the human block, right? So for us, it's kind of cool to see that even in under Moyes, right, we're still kind of doing some of those foundational things to win games.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you can't practice defending a lead unless you have a lead to practice defending. And I think it's nice to have those scenarios arriving more and more frequently as we watch Everton throughout the remainder of the year. Long may it continue. Just a couple more random ones here. Take-ons, a.k.a. dribbles, are down by like 3 per game. I think you can attribute a lot of that to just NJ being out, because we know that he was leading the league in dribbles and take-ons before his injury. And without him, we don't really have the most dynamic wingers or players that you really want taking on players very often. So I almost think this is a good thing, where if you don't have the personnel to do it, why bother trying? Try to beat the defense in other ways. And then the last one, random, but fouls committed is down just slightly. You can almost attribute this to refereeing more than anything else. I think it's just kind of random. But yeah, so that does it for that section. Sean, any final thoughts? I mean, I think the headline is we're playing better, we're scoring more, and there's some tweaks that Moyes has made, but nothing too radical.
No, I think it's interesting because there are some stats when, of course, when we looked at it, James, that you're like, that really, kind of stands out. But I think, of course, the biggest one, and it's very easy to see whether your stats or no stats, is the goals, right? And just kind of seeing how much more clinical we are, how much more shot creation is coming, quality versus quantity. And yeah, we've kind of said it as much as we possibly can. You put the talented players on the pitch that we have, and you put them in spots to succeed, you're going to see progress, and of course, yeah, it's just really exciting.
Well said. The last number that I had here, you talk a lot about Dyche wanting to keep clean sheets. This season, 4 matches in which we kept a clean sheet but failed to win. They were all 0-0 draws. We remember many of those very well. Whereas Moyes, every clean sheet he's managed has been a win. So you got to do it on both sides of the ball. You have to score. Draws are all well and good, but it's helpful when you score. Going into our first question, which is just, we moved it because it's appropriate for the topic. From Nathaniel C. 10910. Has Moyes done anything that has surprised you, either tactically or with the personnel he's picked? I mean, we just did a lot of talk about numbers, but maybe more just, Sean, I'll give it to you first. Tactically, personnel, anything that surprised you?
Well, I'm going to kind of steal your thunder because you said it on a prior pod, but just the usage of Jake O'Brien, right? And I know we've talked about Jake O'Brien, but I think he truly deserves his flowers just because of how good he's been. But him kind of using him as that right back in an unnatural spot, not using it as a back three, we're kind of precarious on what would happen. And I think he's done an incredible job. And you've almost seen the progression, especially offensively, on some of the through balls he's giving, the crossing, as well as still being a stout defender. Mikolenko, I think, sticking with him and really starting to see the dividends of just kind of a solid performer every week. And then lastly, Jack Harrison, I think, is the surprise to me, and just the usage of him, because he was using Jack, keep in mind, well before, right? These injuries started to pile up. I think he saw just kind of, I think, what Jack could do for the team. And it's really, I know I've said it a bunch, but it's really, really nice to see Jack Harrison start to build in confidence and be a contributor for the team. Not only because we're in a position of need for him to do it, but because, yeah, it's just, he's been nothing short of a professional in his time at Everton. And I really want to see him, close the season out well, whether he's a permanent here or not.
Agreed. And you took the 3 that I probably would have said. I mean, I remember when we did the Moyes arrival pod, I said, I think Moyes is going to like the cut of Jack Harrison's jib, and he certainly seems to, but Jack also kind of the beneficiary of the Njai injury, finally getting an opportunity to play on the left and play in his preferred position, and I think you've seen him be more effective as a result of that. We're going to portal in Ryan here for his last comment of the episode. Bloop, 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 bloop. Here's Ryan. He said, there are only 4 players that have played in total, obviously Dyche had almost twice as many games, more minutes under Moyes than Sean Dyche. That is Jake O'Brien, who has played 636 minutes compared to 25 under Dyche. Beto, 534 minutes versus 192. Alcaraz, of course, makes sense. And then Garner, 450 versus 251. And we know Garner has been injured for a really long time. I don't know that was a personnel decision on Dyche's part necessarily, but we didn't really talk about the usage of James Garner and how really he's come back from injury and hardly skipped a beat and been a really impactful player in the midfield for us.
Yeah, I think he's been one that we're really excited about. Of course, I don't blame Dyche too much on that one one simply because he was out for most of the season with injury. And, Dyche really likes James Garner, right? Of course. So whether it be a right back or central midfield. And so, yeah, it's been good to see. Of course, I worry about somebody like Garner because I feel like we put so much on him in regards to minutes load. And of course, with his kind of reoccurring back injuries. So hopefully as the team starts to get healthy, he can have his minutes a bit more managed. I'd also say on the Beto situation, I wouldn't, because given if DCL was healthy, would we see as much as Beto, right? Given that I think when you think of both strikers, Moyes would prefer DCL, and he was essentially starting DCL, right, when he was healthy. But of course, Jake O'Brien, there's no defense to that. I think just, it's criminal what Dyche did and not playing him more, especially given, too. It's not like we had, the best center back in the world, or the two of the best center backs in the world at the time, and then Jake O'Brien. It's, he should have been playing over Michael Keane day 2. So
100%. And on the DCL talk, I do find this kind of narrative, people saying like, why hasn't Beto been playing? He's clearly superior to Dom and all of these things. And I don't really know that that's true. I mean, we saw Dom put in an unbelievable performance the one game he was actually fit. And then the second game he got injured almost immediately. I think Dom could be thriving under Moyes right now. There's no reason in a parallel universe he doesn't get hurt. We're not talking about the resurgence of Moyes just reinvigorating the career of Dominic Calvert-Lewin and having him scoring goals again. I just think that what we've seen from Beto, the clinical finishing, I mean, I think some of those one-on-one situations, something we haven't seen Dom be super clinical in finishing, but I still think it makes more sense to play Beto because he's contracted beyond the season, and it just felt like we were playing Dom out of an unnecessary feeling of obligation that was a bit bizarre. I don't think he's miles better than Beto, and I think Beto in some ways suited Dyche's style of play a little bit better. But in any case, happy to see Beto thriving, happy to see us scoring goals, and happy to see Moyes having such a positive impact on the team. Into the next section we go, citing reporters and talking about the news, because all of this, I think, happened as of today, and there's been a lot to talk about. So we want to hit these kind of quickly. There are some related to executive and football personnel that we're just going to hit on briefly. We got a lot of questions about how we view the football structure and executive structure, and we do want to talk about those things, but we want to talk about them in significant depth, and we also want to make sure Ryan's here because I think he'd probably be upset. He'd be upset
would blow
if we
a gasket.
Talked about it.
Yeah, if you're in the Discord right now, you can see that Ryan wants to talk to somebody about it. So if you have some time, talk to Ryan, please. He needs it.
Yeah. But it's also right in his wheelhouse and something that he does a really good job covering. So we want to make sure we do it justice and that we have the full group here. And also, there's a lot of moving parts. As of today, there seems to be more stuff happening more quickly, and we want to make sure we let the dust settle a little bit before we can speak on things intelligently. But that said, we're going to have some quick takes here. But first and foremost, this came out, I think, the first news of the day to break, and this comes from Paddy Boyland at The Athletic, of course, friend of the show. The tweet is, understand Everton's new £350 million refinancing package was arranged by JP Morgan and should see interest payments more than halve, loans secured against the new stadium. The rumor was from the article that the interest on the old loans was like 15% in the region of 15%. So you're seeing that coming down to in the sevens. And the estimations are that it'll save Everton about £50 million per year in interest expense. So I'll hand it to you first, Sean. I think this is just such fantastic news, and credit to the Friedkin Group for making it happen.
It's such fantastic news, but it's also like, what was Moshiri doing? Like, it's just, and I understand COVID and I understand kind of some of the obstacles in regards to, MSP and the issues there, but it's just absolutely diabolical when you think of just, having essentially, cutting in half the interest payments, and it's a $50 million savings, right? So it's just an insane amount of money, and it's just nice to get kind of the big kids at the table, right, to do the job.
100%. And I think a few things. I mean, yes, Moshiri's hugely to blame for not getting financing in place when interest rates were effectively zero. And then by the time that he was able to secure financing or move forward with financing, he had gone through the Russia sanctions, the Usmanov issues, and kind of the bottom falling out of his own personal wealth and probably his deemed creditworthiness, which led to him, 15%, even for the time we were in with relatively high interest rates, is crazy. But you have to think it's a function of how much are we willing to lend this guy? We don't really know how much like credit, the interest rate reflects the relative risk, right, as an approximation. And so clearly Moshiri was a risky person to lend to. Everton's Premier League status was hugely up for debate, and that was, I think, another thing that factored in. So credit to the Friedkins, obviously much more secure financial hands, financial takeover. They're certainly very creditworthy, have proven to be, and so they can get competitive rates. And this is only going to benefit Everton, saving a huge amount of money on the books and securing the future of the stadium, which is Everton's just such a pivotal asset for the future of the club, and can't understate how important that will be to increasing the stature of the club in the coming years.
Yeah, and then going to our next piece of news, and this was an interesting one. Really want to talk about this one, James, and get your thoughts. Also by Paddy Boyland, Everton have decided not to trigger the 1-year extension in Abdoulaye Doucouré's deal. Midfielder out of contract at end of season, and club would now have to renegotiate completely fresh terms if they want him to stay. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's quite a big piece of news on a Thursday.
Yeah, it was, and I think people maybe misinterpreted this a little bit. Salary information for Premier League teams is kind of hard to come by. There's a lot of estimates out there. So we're going off estimates here. The rumor is that Doucouré, Ghana, and Pickford are the 3 highest paid players on the Everton squad right now. Doucouré is rumored to be on excess of £100,000 per week, which you could argue at the time was reasonable. But the caveat here is the extension would have maintained that level of wages. So he would have still been making that. I think you're looking at a player on the other side of 30 years old, would obviously still a very important part of Everton's team, and I think can continue to be, but I don't think that's where you really want to be having your most expensive players be on the other side of 30. You'd rather reinvest or invest in guys in their prime at the very least. And I think Doucouré still has a lot left to give as a footballer, but I don't think it makes sense for Everton to continue to pay him, make him one of the highest paid squad players. So I imagine they'll still pursue some sort of new deal, but under more favorable terms for Everton. And frankly, like for me, seems like Doucouré could be the type of player who might just say, look, I want one more payday. I'm off to Saudi. I'm off to wherever that will get him the most money. And I wouldn't begrudge him at all for that. He's been such an important part of Everton's struggles in recent years and persevering through those struggles. I would love to see him continue, but I just don't think at that price it's practical to keep him.
Yeah, I think this is kind of one of those, to your point, James, when I first saw this, I got a little bit emotional because I was just like, Doucouré, to your point, it's just, he has truly been a talisman of this club, and he has been such a positive light in regards to such dark times. He's always kind of conducted him outside of the Harry Kane slap with the highest of class. And so, yeah. And
I think that was a classy slap for the record.
Yeah, that was, yeah. I'll give it to him, and of course it led to the Keno banger, so not the worst thing in the world. But all in all, yeah, I think in terms of the business side, right, and of course, with just what we talked about, the Friedkin Group, I think they are doing the right thing in regards to, I have no question in my mind that they probably want him back, but it has to be at terms that make sense for the club. And I'm sure they're not going to just, penny pinch him. But to your point, right, it's just also like, can we guarantee him the same playing time, right, next season? Of course, to your point, he's aging. And I think as we add that talent infusion in the club, right, I think it kind of leads to the question of, I think he'd definitely get an offer. It's just a matter of would he be okay with the terms. So regardless of what he decides, I'll always have an incredibly soft spot for Doucouré. And yeah, I hope he's with us next season. I hope it's kind of a contract that makes sense for both sides. But it is a good business move by the club.
Yeah, undoubtedly cemented himself in Everton history in a number of ways, involved in some huge matches, scored some absolutely massive goals. Nothing but appreciation and love for Dukes. We, and his relentless engine, hope to see it emerge at Bramley-Moore Dock next season, but if not, send him off with nothing but well wishes. Next up, we shift from the Paddy Boylan section of the program to the Bobble section of the program. A couple headlines here. Everton and Kevin Thelwell are now set to part ways, with the Friedkin Group set to implement a new structure at the football club. Bobble doesn't mention what that structure will be, but clearly we've known that Thelwell is not long for the Everton world for some time now, but this seems like, there was a conversation on the Discord about this just yesterday. Why keep him why have him see out his contract to the end of the season if he's just a lame duck, essentially. And I think it's a totally valid question, and this seems to answer that, and the answer seems to be, well, we won't keep him.
Yeah, for me, this one I'm actually pretty sad about. I've voiced plenty of times through the toughest times in regards to how much I really appreciate Kevin Thelwell, and I think he's done a fantastic job, all things considered, in regards to his time in the club. But this is kind of what I wish for Dyche, in the sense of just kind of see out your contract, do a good job, and almost, you go off into the sunset and you leave kind of in a better position, right? Where I don't think he's going to have a shortage of offers. He has to check his LinkedIn because the Discord has quite a few requests in his inbox. But all joking aside, I think he's done a great job at Everton. I will miss him because I do think he really has done a great job in taking us through the dark times. But I also think that he will land on his feet just fine. But it does make me curious in regards to this structure, right, James? Because we don't know exactly what that is right now.
We certainly don't. And I'll echo that. I mean, nothing but admiration and appreciation for Kevin Thelwell. I think as time goes on, another one who will just be remembered for playing an incredibly important role through a truly, truly dark and difficult time in Everton's history, with arguably the hardest job of any team in certainly the Premier League in terms of finances, but in the top 4 divisions, maybe, like having to stay in the league with negative money spent and to get the deals done that he did, to get the personnel in place, to support Sean Dyche, Lampard, etc. in their efforts. I know people feel a certain way because we missed on certain targets and we signed Mopé and all that. And once we have a new pseudo replacement for Thelwell, we'll talk about some of that business in hindsight. But I do think that people who think he did a terrible job are just completely out to lunch. Like, there's just, the evidence is overwhelming that he had to work under such hard circumstances and achieved his objective. The ultimate objective was to keep Everton in the league, and he did that. And I don't know how you can really criticize him for that.
I would like to say that if you wanted to have the best-selling Everton book of all times, it needs to be co-authored by Marcel Brands and Kevin Thelwell about their experiences at Everton. And I would just love to read that. I don't care if it was 1,000 pages. I think that would be a bestseller, not only for Everton fans, but I think just footballing nation as a whole.
Yeah, I hope that someday some of them, and they're professionals, so they'll probably keep it under wraps, but if even a fraction of what some of the stuff I've heard behind the scenes is remotely true, like, the job is infinitely harder than even we think it is, because they've had to just deal with the level of dysfunction in the organization has been off the charts. They've navigated it and got us through to the other side, and they deserve so much credit for that. Next one, sort of tied to this. Everton are in talks, also from the bubble. Everton are in talks with former West Ham head of recruitment, Rob Newman. The 61-year-old has worked with David Moyes previously and has also worked at Man City and Bournemouth, respectively. Kind of wish we could do this more justice to talk about Rob Newman in a bit more detail. We'll probably cover him if we move forward with this, but initial thoughts on this, Sean. I think Ryan's comment here is a fair question to be asking, and I think many fans are asking it.
Yeah, so Ryan's comment is, should we worry that the departure of Thelwell could mean a lesser role for the next football director in favor of more control of personnel decisions for Moyes? The link is concerning to me, but I'm not going to get concerned until we start to see some sort of structure developed, right? And the rumor mill is alive and well. I can promise you, between the really strong links of Thomas Souček, Vladimir Soufal, and Richarlison's coming back to the club, I can tell you that it's not silly season, it's lazy season, right? So there's a lot of links right now that I think are just kind of going to go through the internets. And for me, of course, it's from an incredibly reputable source in the bobble, right? So I'm not questioning that. But in terms of footballing structure, because it also doesn't really say what Rob Newman's going to do, right? It kind of talks about what he did at West Ham, but in regards to what his role, let's just say if he does join Everton, is he going to be assistant DOF? Is he going to just have some, kind of magic title, right? It's very easy to speculate right now. I think really the only thing, and of course we'll get to in another episode, I think that I feel somewhat confident in is, of course, the CEO coming in terms of Angus. But also, once again, right, I think there's a lot of questions that can come out from this, but until we start to see actual dominoes start to fall, it's all speculation.
Yeah, it is all speculation, and you're right. We have to wait for the dust to settle. I will say there is precedent for David Moyes moving to a new club and trying to poach well-beloved players from the previous club. We, of course, saw that at Manchester United when he tried to pilfer, and did pilfer, Fellaini, tried to get Seamus Coleman, Leighton Baines. So in that sense, it is a little bit concerning to me. If you've listened to this show at all over the years, you know that we're advocates generally for there being limited involvement by the manager in recruitment decisions. They should have input, certainly, but they should not be the one making the final call. And I'll leave it for when we have Ryan, because I know he has a lot to say on this topic and is probably saying stuff right now on the Discord. But I share some of his concerns. I'm not as proactively upset about it because, to your point, Sean, it is speculation at this point. We don't know what the structure will be. And I do have faith that the Friedkin Group will establish a coherent structure of some sort. They don't strike me as an organization that's going to come in and just say, okay, we're going to revert to a structure that has really fallen out of favor in the last 15, 20 years. Even though they hired a manager who is one of the few remaining active managers who actually has worked with that level of authority. And I'm certain that he probably would like that level of authority again in some way, but he has to be accountable to someone. He can't be running everything purely for continuity's sake. That's really what it comes down to. Is managers don't last forever. They never do, especially in the modern age. And if you give them too much influence, you lose the manager, bottom falls out, and there's chaos. And you need to have continuity and structure and accountability and all those things that lead to a successful organization. And I hope that the Friedkin Group implement that. I'll leave it there for now because we have a lot more to say on the topic, but we'll leave it for a later episode. Sean, take us into the last news bit.
Yeah, so once again by the Bobble, Everton's chief commercial officer, Richard Kenya, is in discussions to depart the club, with the Friedkin Group looking to appoint a new set of executives. Kind of the only thing I'll say in regards to my only worry is the idea that they kind of have the CEO in place, but none of the other kind of structure, right? So let's just say if the Friedkin Group are kind of deciding that, you'd expect the CEO to potentially be the ones to select those. So that's really, I think, kind of the only concern. But once again, it's all speculation, right? Because we don't exactly know, when people are going to get hired. Let's just say if they do have kind of that verbal agreement, if they're getting kind of some of his guys. So yeah, it's a lot to kind of think about, but I'm glad that, we're talking about this rather than kind of relegation concerns.
100%. And as someone who's been no stranger to frequent org chart and confusing org charts in my professional life, I think Everton's org chart is looking a little bit wonky, let's say, for the time being. To your point, I mean, it should be ownership appoints the board, or serves on the board in Everton's case, because we know Dan Friedkin's on the board, appoints the board appoints the executives appoint everyone downstream from that, and that's how you sort of build a successful organization, or at least that's the chain of command, whether or not those people are still in place. And I don't begrudge the Friedkins at all for wanting to kind of bring their team in. I think that's kind of inevitable to some extent. There's no way they were going to just keep everyone, say business as usual. I do worry, I guess, in a big picture sense, the amount of footballing change that's going to need to occur at Everton over the summer, and then you're also changing everything above them. It's a lot of change in a short space of time, and that needs to be really tightly managed and controlled, because those types of radical shifts can go completely awry. And I think that's one of the more disappointing things about Thelwell is, like, you could have kept him and really done a lot of restructuring above him, put the pieces in place, and then moved on from him. But it seems like they just want to move swiftly and quickly, and that can go well, there's no doubt about it, but it can also go pretty poorly if it's not handled correctly. So the hope is that they will do it correctly, and this radical change will just build a platform for Everton to grow on and move into this new era.
Yeah, and with that, we are going to get into our mailbag of questions of sorts, and to what James said, sincere apologies if we don't get to your question. If we didn't get to your question, it's kind of for one of two reasons. There might be a third. James, please correct me. The first reason is it will be part of a future topic that we will most likely either answer your question that you submitted or answer the question in the topic. And the second question, or the second reason, is because the question is so detailed or so, I think, intricate, and we truly appreciate the question, but it would add another 20 minutes to the podcast, and we wouldn't be able to do rapid fire. It would turn into a rapid cold real quick. So yeah, it's for us, those are kind of the two reasons. James, I'll leave it with you to see if there's anything I missed.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, to your point, Sean, some of those questions could be an episode in themselves. So Thank you for giving us more ideas for content. We do appreciate that, and definitely have the gears turning on some of those. So again, sincere thanks to everyone who submitted a question. And let's just get into it, Sean. Let's do it. We'll start with Matt Clevy, rhymes with Chevy, loyal Discord member, friend of the show for a very long time. Starting off with, what are the reasons you're most excited for the start of the Friedkin Group era, and what, if anything, do you have reservations about? I'll hand it to you, Sean.
Yeah, so I think the first one is pretty obvious, and we've talked about, is the professionalism in terms of the businessmen that they are, of course, the businesses that they have, the relationship with Roma, and just owning a club before, really capitalizing on the commercial opportunity. I think that's the biggest thing because, of course, how badly Mashiri has handled that. They're American, right, which could be good or bad, of course. You see a good example in Mick Foley, who's done an incredible job at Bournemouth since he's taken over, and then you see Todd Bowley, right, and kind of just the circus that he's created. But I will say they have great relationships on the financial side, as you kind of saw with JP Morgan and that relationship. And I'm sure in regards to any creditors that they're probably highly regarded. And so I'm not worried about kind of the shadiness, when it comes to, when they get a relationship with the bank, right? It's not just this kind of, are they a bank? Are they like a crypto company? Are they, what are we kind of getting into, right? So the concerns piece is, have they learned from the mistakes with Roma, right? Because when I think of the Roma situation and kind of how they mishandled things, are they going to kind of use those as learning spots, right, for Everton? I mean, you have a long sample size of how badly this club was run. You look at the Steve Walsh days, right, when we had money to spend and how we've misspent that, right? So are they looking at that? Looking at, Moyes, right? And let's just say if you wanted to give him a role in having a larger say on recruitment, right? Looking at those transfer windows at West Ham and saying, is this guy really the right guy to do it? So I just, more than anything, whatever the decision they make, I just hope they use kind of the logic that they would in business. They have the sample size, right? It's not to say that they don't. And I think for the board's sake, right, there's concern there in regards to just, it's a very pivotal time for the club. It's a very exciting time for the club. But the last thing we want, right, is to kind of go back to 2017 to 2020 where we kind of just, have the money to spend. We get some good players, but we just spend way too much money on things that we don't need. I don't want to see us buy 4 number 10s in one window, right? So it's just, I'm not as concerned about things like that, but it is kind of things to just watch for just because they have made mistakes in the past. Everybody will. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be perfect, but it is, just those are quick concerns for me.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I think you said that extremely well. Succinctly put, I'll say they're not Moshiri. I think it's almost impossible to run a club worse than Moshiri did. So, touch wood, I think it's almost impossible for them to be worse. They're almost naturally going to be an improvement. Their arrival coinciding with the stadium, I think, is just, I'm almost amazed that they're probably amazed they stumbled on this opportunity because it's so good for them. But if I'm being honest with myself, outside of the business stuff and the future of the club, I'm excited to actually hopefully get a decent sponsor on our kits. I'm so sick of not wanting to buy a kit because the sponsor's so hideously ugly or just ethically questionable or just outright bad. So I'm looking forward to naming rights to the stadium, having a great new kit with a reputable sponsor on the front that I won't be ashamed to wear in public. No more Angry Birds on the sleeve, no more steak.com on the front of the shirt. Let's get some Toyota logos on the front or something legit. But in addition to that, all the things you said, Sean, for sure.
So next up, we have Robert Morrison, and I want to kind of hand this question off to you and get your first thought, especially. I'm heading over for my first trip to Liverpool starting on Saturday. Congrats, Robert. Really excited for you. Any tips for the city and or matchday experience?
This is a great question. Also, congratulations. I'm super jealous that you get to make it over one more time. Hopefully you're not like me and you are a curse for the team because I just have had the worst luck. I saw the Gylfi Sigurdsson improperly ruled, or it was Dominic Calvert-Lewin who scored it. Gylfi Sigurdsson ruled offside for sitting down in front of the keeper. I saw us lose 4-0 at Stamford Bridge, and I saw us lose 2-1 to Luton Town last year in the pouring rain. So I hope you have good weather, and I hope you get a great result. Tips for the city and or match day. So I'm going to, for you specifically, Robert, I'm sure you have your accommodations sorted, but I would say for anyone else planning a trip, stay in the city center if you can. It's much easier to get out to the stadium. The first trip I went, we stayed pretty close to the stadium, and we were pretty far from everything else that you'd want to do. St. Luke's Church on match day. If you have time to go up there, they usually have a really cool, the Everton Heritage Society does a really cool kind of display, and they have a lot of really cool historical posters, merchandise, things like that. It's just a really neat setup they have there, and hopefully they continue it at Bramley-Moore Dock, but I don't know where, which is upstairs at St. Luke's Church. The restaurant Murray in the city center, Mediterranean food, I've recommended it to a few people. Absolutely unbelievable food. Definitely go there if you like Mediterranean. I'm a Winslow guy. I think you are as well, Sean. There's also the Brick. I know a lot of people like. Get it, just go. Honestly, I'd bop around between them all if you're only going to get to go one more time, because of course, hopefully they're able to stay open without Everton match days, but amazing pubs. You'll meet a ton of really friendly and awesome Blues there.
Yeah, I mean, I think well said, James. In terms of kind of other things I'd add, of course, checking out the docks, really cool part of town. There's some really good restaurants over there. And so just a walking experience if it's nice out. Of course, check out BMD, right? That would be, of course, a great thing to do. My favorite spot, especially if you're a coffee drinker, Robert, if anybody is, Bold Street Coffee, really good breakfast as well. Just kind of reminded me as much as the States as you can, just because no one in Europe really knows what a cold brew is. But yeah, no, Bold Street Coffee, can't say enough good things about that. And I think to what James said, just don't be a stranger to, right? Whether you're going alone or with friends. I know I went with Josh from the Discord when we went to my first pilgrimage to Goodison. It's just, don't be a stranger, right? Everybody's an Evertonian. And so, whether you chat about just nonsense or the club or whatnot, it's a fun time. So yeah, I'm really excited for you. Take it all in, and you're going to a great match. So
yeah, enjoy it. One other thing, just city-wise, if you're a fan of music, highly recommend a Beatles tour. It's really cool to see the history. I mean, I'm a big Beatles fan, so just to see all the places they grew up, like in the flesh, Strawberry Fields and John Lennon's childhood house, like all that stuff is just really cool. And yeah, just enjoy the match. I'd get there early, get to the pubs, bounce around. I think all that, and you'll have a great time. Everyone's super friendly. Some of the people, taxi drivers in particular, might be a little surprised that you're an American Everton fan and not an American Liverpool fan, but they're usually good fun about it. Next question from T-Rev from the Discord. Favorite player in the youth system, and one player, any league, that would be your personal favorite addition.
Yeah, so I'll start. Of course, Harrison Armstrong is kind of the obvious one, but I think if I had to kind of look, and our youth system isn't great, so, that's another thing that we have to improve, but I'd go with Omari Benjamin. And then a really good question by T-Rev in terms of the one player any league. This will be a stretch, and I don't think, of course, it could happen, but Johan Bakayoko from PSV, the 21-year-old winger, just an absolute stud. I think you want to talk about like a dream target when we'll, of course, kind of really go into a deep dive in the summer. But when you kind of can get a guy in that 20 to 23 age range, right, that's young and not only kind of just, raw in talent, but just also so ready, right, and just so talented. But, those guys are going to cost a high fortune, right? So it's just, but yeah, you asked the question. I think he would be an incredible fit here, and really, I'd love to see him and Jai kind of play together. So yeah, that would be my pick. What about you, James?
I'm going to go with a kind of another low-hanging fruit answer in Roman Dixon, in that we saw him get game time. He's a right back, position of need for us. I'd agree with you, Sean. Like, obviously our academy isn't the best at the moment. I think that's partially because we had a transfer ban for a long time from signing youth players, and we haven't had money for the first team, so naturally academy investment is also not going to be a priority, but Friedkins have stated that that's one of their objectives, to reinvigorate the academy and bring through some real talents. So I hope to see that come to pass. For any player, I went with, because this is an American show, I went with an American in Chris Richards from Crystal Palace. I think just as a center back, plays in a 3 currently, but is good size, physical. I think he could be a really good complement and still pretty young, so an interesting profile. Be hard to prize him away from Palace probably, and would command the PL additional fee of several million most likely, but I'm just so desperate to have another American. I posted a tweet the other day. It's been like 8 years since Tim Howard played his last game for the club, and we haven't had an American since. It's just overdue. We got American owners. Just make it happen, Friedkins, please.
And with that, we're going to go to another great question and another great loyalist to the Discord, Jeremiah Baker. Really fun question. Favorite game in the Dyche era and favorite signing of the KT era. I was in between two, and Jeremiah, I think you'd appreciate this. A game that you attended, Everton 3, Bournemouth 0. Absolutely banger from Jack. And then Doucouré scored a really nice goal as well. But I had to go with Everton 5, Brighton 1. The most improbable of improbable results. I mean, you want to talk about just kind of Dyche kind of having one on somebody. It's Roberto De Zerbi. Roberto De Zerbi hasn't beat Everton under Dyche. Doucouré, 2 excellent finishes, right? So the Doucouré hate brigade had to eat a little bit there. Dwight just with one of the silkiest goals you can ask for, dropping the keeper to the defender, just gave up, right? And that's not saying something to Dwight's pace if you gave up on him, right? And just, of course, what a result, right, that day. And it was funny because I was just looking at the highlights again, and Fulham beat Leicester City 5-3 that day. So you can imagine in terms of the relegation odds, what that did. For me, the favorite signing was Amadou Onana, and simply because you look at where the club was, I just think it's a true credit to Kevin Thelwell and the recruitment team to bring a player of that caliber that had high demand across Europe, and for him to choose us. And I think, of course, I think he represented himself well, all things considered, and just really excited to kind of follow his career. And yeah, it just those are the type of players, right? When you think of Everton and wanting to go forward, those are the players we want to sign, right? And so, just in a very dark time, that was a very positive light in being able to sign a player like him.
Great answers. I went with, and the easy answer, but it's just so true. It's Everton 2, Liverpool 0. The context of that game, in that it both basically ended their hopes at a title. You lost the league at Goodison Park, and that it more or less, not mathematically, but put us effectively safe at the time. Jared Branthwaite scoring early, Dominic Calvert-Lewin towering header in the second half. I mean, totally unexpected. We were so low at that time. We're looking at games okay, well, we need to win this one. There's no way we win the derby. And then we won it. And it was just thrilling in the circumstances to get one over on the neighbors, and also to almost secure our safety. The fortunes, the tides that turned that day were just incredible. And to do it in front of a crowd, because the previous derby win was under Carlo with no crowd. So to do it in front of a Goodison Park, that was an unbelievable atmosphere, was really special. For favorite signing, it's got to be Iliman Ndiaye for me. He's just such a revelation this season, giving us qualities that we haven't had in so long. The dribbling, and a player again, kind of good age profile, right skill set, position of need, and a player with Premier League experience, but had kind of fallen off the radar of some people, wasn't thriving at Marseille, comes into Everton and just makes an immediate huge improvement to our ability to get forward and create opportunities to score and score goals. He's just been so great, and I can't wait until he's fit again.
Yeah, and I think to your point, James, we've never had a player like him in recent memory, right? So it's just with how skillful he is, I think that's an incredible shout. I'm going to ask this question and answer it real quick because I don't want to spend too much time on this. What kind of spirit powers the optimism train? And of course, we wanted to get some funny questions in. We like to laugh, believe it or not, on this show.
We do.
I know it's not Cole, since you're a pro Just Stop Oil podcast. So I'm going to speak real quick on this. So the origin of the optimism train, of course, came in the dark times of our relegation battle. I was as positive as you could be, annoyingly positive, even during the 5-0 Spurs drubbing, getting tomatoes thrown at me, et cetera, et cetera. And, at the end of the day, for me, and of course, just, on a mental health standpoint, I couldn't get it in me to just, sulk and complain. And I'm not saying that it wasn't deserved or rational. But yeah, it was just kind of one of those things where it's just I just wanted to stay positive through it all, right? Even at times as irrational as it was. And what was really cool about it was just a few others kind of, lurkers just kind of came up, James Shea, Evertonian optimist, and others. And then it just became a thing. I have never kind of self-proclaimed a nickname for myself, but it's kind of just stuck. And of course, during the multiple relegation battles that we've been, I've continued to stay strong. And it's been fun, and I love the banter, appreciate just kind of the back and forth. But yeah, just, of course, one of those things that came from a very dark time.
Yeah, and I mean, we gave you plenty of shout-outs on the pod before you eventually joined us on a permanent basis, and your optimism was very much appreciated. Next up, we go to Mark, Southeast Michigan Toffee, who said, as a general rule, so not specific to the current Everton squad, what is your ideal/favorite formation and style of play? I'll give it to you first, Sean.
Sure. I went with 4-2-3-1. I think, just as a full disclosure, any formation could be successful, right? So it's not, let's just make sure that we know that. But yeah, 4-2-3-1. And I really love, if you talk about kind of an ideal version of it, of what Areola's done at Bournemouth. I think I've read a lot of articles in regards to kind of the coaching that he does. It's very organized chaos, but allowing players to kind of express themselves, and even some of the things he does in training in regards to making them have to make quick decisions, right? And just trying to almost like cheat the exercise to win and things like that. So I just love the creative license that kind of he plays with. So to me, it's like any formation, can be successful. It's just keeping that creative license, allowing the players to play. And even you see with Moyes right now, right? It's not, he doesn't have a revolutionary formation, but he's allowing players to be successful because it's just simply he's putting them in good spots.
Yeah, I'm going with a slight variation. I've always just kind of liked the 4-3-3 in that it's just slightly more attacking than the 4-2-3-1. You push those wide midfielders up a little further. Have one play as kind of a true winger staying wide and have an inverted forward. Requires a lot of legs out of that midfield. There's midfield three. There's a lot of ground they have to cover. But that's a formation that I've always gravitated toward in, Football Manager, FIFA, and it's kind of fallen out of favor. I think it's not quite as prevalent as it was in recent years, but that's got a special place in my heart for sure. But to your point, any formation can work, and you really have to adapt to your personnel. Next up, we go to Steve B. What is a realistic expectation in terms of points and overall position in the table, both this season and next? Points is a tough one to predict, but I think table position might be a little more manageable.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. To me, I put 14th through 16th, just looking at the table before Steve asked this question. You look at United, us, and kind of West Ham. I think that's kind of our tier. I think Palace is kind of pulling away, and maybe Brentford we can catch, but then you look at April, right? That's going to be, I think we'll get points. I just don't think we'll get enough. And then, looking at next season, I'm being a little bit optimistic here in the sense of, but I think 9th through 11th, one might say that's not very optimistic. I think if you look at the top end of the Premier League, it's pretty competitive, right? And I think you're starting to see these teams get better and better, right? And so for us, I think after a quality summer and just not having as horrific of a start as we did, right? I don't expect us to go on this form that we're on right now for a full season. But yeah, I think that's definitely in the realistic realm, right? And that would be, I think, a good season and a good building block, right? Going forward. What about you?
Totally fair. For this season, I think I'm going to be slightly aspirational here. I think we can get up to 13th. I know next month is going to be absolutely brutal fixture-wise, and maybe we'll stall out slightly there in terms of continuing to pick up points, but then we have, some decent games after that. And right now we're really one off of 13th, and it'd be really nice to finish above Spurs and United. I would just love that so much given everything we've gone through. For next season, I'm going to be a little more conservative and say that if we can get between 11th and 13th and kind of hold our own and maintain our position, I think that would be a huge win in that there's so much change that needs to take place this summer. If you can execute that well and really, I think Everton are basically at their floor, but I think the Premier League's so competitive and we do have some catching up to do in terms of squad value and recruitment, and that's going to take a number of windows in an amount of time. I think if you can just get into that safely top of the bottom half of the table and just stay there for a season and then use that as a building block to hopefully continue to move up a couple positions every year. And then maybe, who knows, you get Europe one year. The concern is maybe what other teams have faced is you get Europe too early and you kind of overextend yourself with the additional matches and the schedule, and then you kind of revert or drop in the league as a cost to that. And I'd like us to be, measured growth that's not overextending ourselves too much.
Totally agree. So I included this question, Paul. I do apologize. I did not see 10 individual likes for the fruit question, and also too, we'll answer that question when Ryan's on the pod. So I think But we'll answer this. I'm going to be incredibly vulnerable here. When he said favorite nightshade, I mean, I've been watching Night Agent recently. I've been watching The Recruit. So I thought we were talking about some kind of film of that regard. And then, of course, it's vegetables. So, or just kind of, a class. So for me, I went potato. I love potatoes. I mean, who doesn't in regards to just French fries? And you think of how versatile it is. So many kind of analogies in regards to the boiling and mashing and just like how versatile. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's a really fun question, Mike. So appreciate the question. What about you, James?
Yeah, I mean, potatoes a super obvious choice and a very good one at that. I went a little bit more unconventional, and though I'm about 75% Irish, the potato would be the natural choice. I went with the chili pepper. I also like a good bell pepper, but a chili pepper specifically. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've really expanded my palate into spicy foods, and so really like the hint of spice and have gone pretty heavy into like the habaneros of the world. So getting adventurous, ghost peppers, all that good stuff.
Quick follow-up question. What's your favorite colored bell pepper?
Gonna go green.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Staple.
Yeah.
Don't need
staple.
Not too sweet.
Okay.
Though I'll mix them up. I like a good variety.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Carter F., the Texan Bauble. His actual question, a lot of people had to ask a silly question and then ask a real question. If the Blue Frontier took over as joint DOFs, who would the realistic transfer targets be? Who would we try to sell? Which contracts do we extend? Again, this is one that borders on. This could literally be probably its own episode in itself, but I'll hand it off to Sean. You can answer the first part, and I'll take a stab at the second.
Well, the first thing I would do is send Ryan to South America. So just full disclosure, because he's well within the cultures, and I think the South American people would take to Ryan well. Going into, actually answering the question seriously, getting a good look at the free agent market, and it's a really good question by Carter, but there are actually some interesting free agents out there in the summer that I don't really know about their contract status. So give you an example on the right back situation. You have Kyle Walker-Peters, which good on us for not buying him in the winter window, because he's essentially going to be on a free, and I haven't really seen any hard links with him. Ola Aina at Forest, I think he's a very serviceable right back, and I think he would do just fine. And then, of course, a guy that Ryan's mentioned a bunch of times, as well as James, Kene Tete at Fulham, who's injured right now, but I think another serviceable right back. The only kind of negative with those guys are they're kind of in their upper 20s, right? So if that would be kind of considered a negative. But then another thing would be, can we get in the Angel Gomez and Jonathan David sweepstakes, right? So it's just, because both of those guys are on freeze. So outside of that, what I would really want to do is invest quality funds into guys that the collective brain trust, whenever that gets creative, really feel confident about. So a guy that's come up before, and of course we'll talk about him in more detail, is Juan Luis Sanchez from Sevilla, the right back. I think he'd be a great fit personally. But then also looking at the relegated teams, right, that go down, because there's always talent that is ripe for the picking. And so a few that kind of come to mind, Jacob Greaves, of course, a guy that, James talked about in the summer last, as well as Ryan. Steffi Mavididi is a guy that I think would be interesting. Of course, not as a starter, but more of a squad player, as well as Bilal El Khanous. I don't think Leicester would let him go, but him and Njai would be absolute showstoppers to me, my opinion. And then somebody like Sulemana would add some insane pace to the team. And I think you can get him, because I think he just does not want to be at Southampton, and I don't blame him anymore. And then maybe looking at South America and really pulling the trigger on Wesley Franca, because I know we've definitely had some discussions with him, and really kind of starting that South American infusion, getting Charlie more friends, right? Especially if we go forward. What are your thoughts, James?
Yeah, some good names in there, Sean, for sure. I mean, Kyle Walker-Peters is a really interesting one. Jacob Greaves, another one really like. Sulemana, for sure. I won't build on this one too much. Also from Southampton, I do like Cameron Archer quite a bit. I think he could be a really interesting piece. But in terms of the second part of Carter's question, who would we try to sell? I think it's obvious that if you're going to sell someone and really commit to a rebuild, you have to look at Jared Branthwaite, just because of what those funds could be reinvested into or dispersed across the squad. As much as I don't want to see him go, I think you can probably afford to do it if you get the right other pieces in place to have a solid center back pairing, and you have Jake O'Brien right there ready to move into his actual position. So I think mechanically that works better than some of the other pieces. And frankly, Everton don't have a ton of guys who are going to generate that kind of revenue, guys who are going to generate any revenue. Nathan Patterson is one that, even though you're basically selling him at probably his lowest market value. We paid way too much for him to begin with. I just think he needs to go, both from his standpoint, like he hasn't played, his career's completely stagnated. He needs to go somewhere he can play. I guess you could loan him out potentially and see if you can, bump up his value. But I just don't see him really having a future, even though you'd think he'd be a player Moyes might be interested in. Clearly, the fact he's not getting a nod now points to him not having much of a future at Everton. Re-signing, I think Doucouré under better terms and Gonagay are absolute no-brainers. Even Dominic Calvert-Lewin, if he actually wants to come to the table and sign a deal, I think he's pretty much gone at this point without a shadow of a doubt, but he could be a useful piece without question. And then Ashley Young, super cheap deal for just a depth rotation player, and just to have a 40-year-old in the squad would be quite interesting. There's some other deals, and we'll talk about more of that sort of squad composition as we go into later in the season and into the summer, no doubt.
Yeah, no, great answer. I think the only person I might add, and just because he's starting to really play well, is Mikalenko. I think his market value, I don't think of course we wouldn't make the money we spent on him, but you talk about, even if it's, let's just say 5 to 10 million, James, right, for a guy that it might not be in the plans. His wages aren't that crazy either, so I think for a team that would take him, Dwight McNeil's another one. But like we said, like you said, James, I don't want to steal thunder. We're going to talk about that more in detail when the time is appropriate. This is a really fun question by Watt Dog. If Everton was an animal, what would it be? And who would you want the first game at the new stadium for the first team in a fully attended game? James, I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, I wish I could have given this one more thought, but we were thinking of answers to our questions in advance, and I couldn't dedicate quite as much thoughtfulness, but I went with Black Bear. Firstly, they hibernate for a really long time, and I think you could make the claim that Everton have been in hibernation for the better part of 30 years now and are just about ready to reawaken. They're also the mascot for my college and my high school, fun fact. So a little bit of a affinity for the Black Bear, also being from Maine. And then for the first game at the new stadium, I'm going to go with Bournemouth because I think it'd just be really nice to kind of kick the tires on to see if the Everton curse was just a Goodison specific thing, or if we're going to carry on with the Everton curse at the new stadium. And yes, Ryan, if you're still listening to this episode an hour plus in, there is an Everton curse, but we may be leaving it in the dust, and I want to test that as soon as possible.
Yeah, so for mine, I said, please, for the love of God, not a black cat. We've seen enough. We've seen enough black cats at Goodison, at Cowboy Stadium, et cetera, et cetera. I said a jaguar from South America. Let's just get the South American infusion in any way, shape, and possible. Right? If we need to, just essentially get a helicopter, Friedkin's helicopter, and just drop it down safely, of course. Right? We're animal supporters here. But it's so funny, you could really tell how much Everton's infused in you, because I thought about this question way too much. I was like, I don't want to play a relegated team because, of course, if we lose to a relegated team, we'll never hear the end of it from Cryptus. I don't want to play a top team in regards to the Liverpool or Manchester City or whatnot, because you don't get it. You'd love for the first game to be a win. And so I went with Crystal Palace simply because that is a team that for whatever reason we are just having a good run against, and I think the luck would still continue to go. Our next question, on a serious note, and this kind of goes into something we talked about, James, and I'll let you start. On a serious note, where and how does McNeil fit in when and if he's healthy?
Yeah, and that's from Dr. H. Toothrot. I do feel like Moyes is going to like McNeil, though I don't, if he comes back this season, which looks not that likely, I do still feel like left wing is a potential spot for him, but I think he's now probably the depth option with Njai taking his spot. Could move Njai centrally, but what do you do with Alcaraz in that case? What do you do with Doucouré? You have some flexibility. But one thing that we talked about McNeil quite a bit, I know you put this, Sean, so I won't steal your answer, but utilizing McNeil in a slightly more defensive role, I think, is something that would be really interesting, because I think he just has the qualities to kind of get up and down the pitch and contribute on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know what Moyes thinks about him, right? Moyes, especially at his time as West Ham, he played with plenty of slow players, right? So it's not like pace will be kind of a limiting factor for him. I do think the skill of being able to kind of put set pieces in, right? Especially in a match, right, where let's just say if Jack or Jesper don't have it, right, you have that option if in fact he's healthy. And so it would also be interesting to, because we've kind of cried about this a little bit in regards to like putting him in a bit of a utility role where he doesn't have to run his socks off for 90 minutes, right? Is he better in a position where he can kind of be forward and not have to basically kind of be, in terms of Dyche, just like running all over the pitch with his chicken, like a chicken with his head cut off. So I don't know if we'll see it just given the surgery. I hope we do, just because it would be sad to kind of, not be able to see Dwight and then let's just say he gets sold. So yeah, hope he's healthy, hope he's all well. But I would say probably left wing. And then of course, if Mykolenko is out for any, injuries or whatnot, it'd be interesting to see him back. Going to our next question, and really want to give this guy a shout out, Anthony Abramov, message both James and I. Really appreciate the message and really wanted to shout you out for messaging us and being a part of the Discord. And his question is a great one. I think it'd be cool to talk about maybe some of your guys' favorite games or moments that define modern day Everton. James, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, going to tread common ground. This is, I think, pretty easy for me. Both 2-0 Derby wins under Carlo and Dyche, just fantastic moments. The highs of being in Everton in the last 5 or so years. I also think the Newcastle 1-0, the Frank Lampard era, the late Alex Iwobi goal, the just stop oil guy zip tying himself to the post, giving us enough stoppage time to then score that goal. Just chaos at Goodison, all in the thick of a relegation battle. On the negative side, because it's not truly Everton if it's all positive, because God knows it has not been all positive in recent years. The Derby in 22 with the late Pickford punching it up off the crossbar, dropping down to Divock Origi. Maximum pain as an Everton fan. We were so close to getting a result, and Divock Origi was such a pain in the ass, and he just shows up in those random moments. There's a few other ones, but I'll go to you, Sean. What did you go with?
Yeah, so also, I know we got the question about kind of our origin and fanhood, and we will answer that question when Ryan's on the podcast too, because I think it'd be a really fun roundtable. But yeah, just for favorite games that come to mind, I put the 2009 FA Cup semifinal against Manchester United, where we won 4-2 in penalties. Of course, Tim Howard, famous American, right? That was such a reason for so many of us to be fans of the club. And then, of course, in Everton, that moment and losing in the final, scoring in the first 25 seconds, but then having 4 guys out, Arteta, Yakubu, Jagielka out for injury. And so it's just kind of like we get there, we do this, great thing, and then we kind of just Everton that. Everton 3, Arsenal in 2014, 0. That was kind of, I remember I was so proud to be an Evertonian in that moment because we were truly on our top 4 kind of like realm, and then we just truly botched it at the end with some just absolutely horrid results that put us to 5th that season. We did finish above Liverpool and Manchester United that season, so that was some great times. And then, of course, both 4-0 wins against Manchester City, where Tom Davis had that incredible run. Yeah, I mean, it was almost like the worst thing for him when you kind of think about it in hindsight, because it just put like all this pressure on him. And then, of course, Lookman
goal too.
Yeah, Lookman goal was great. And then, of course, the Manchester United game where we just, that was kind of a really fun run of games under Marco Silva, where we just looked unstoppable, right? And we were beating like some of the best teams in the league for fun. And then, of course, I don't mean to have a loser's mentality here, but you can't not mention the 3-2 Palace win, and just kind of, what it meant for the club's future, or lack thereof, if, let's just say we went down. So yeah, great question.
The Palace highlight video is still a great watch. I go back and watch it every now and then. And it's funny, like I've been doing this Everton podcast for almost 6 years now. My memory of games is so bad. Like I can barely remember a game a month ago, much less 7 or 8 years. I mean, I've been a fan for half my life at this point, 15, 16 years. And I mean, I need to go back and really like dig into the schedule and really remember a lot of those games. Another one that jumps to mind is, of course, like that late Jagielka equalizer in the Derby. Mm-hmm. The Derbies always, stick out in the mind, but there's been some really fun wins over the years, and God knows we've had way too few of them in recent times. So hopefully back to winning more consistently as we go ahead.
No, for sure. And then, of course, Beto's, I don't know if it's his agent, his favorite person, Jackson, I hope Beto loves you as much as you love Beto. Who is your favorite Everton player, and why is it Beto? The answer is Beto, and I just want to know why. So, Jackson, if you gave us the answer, why are you asking the question? But in all seriousness, really appreciate, from one optimist to another, can only appreciate that comment. I'm going to go first, and James, I apologize if I steal your answer, but I'm going to go with Jordan Pickford. And the reason I wanted to go with Jordan Pickford is, Jordan Pickford had such a monumental role, not only in the club's kind of current status, but just you think of, he was kind of the last keeper since Tim Howard, right? And of course, Tim Howard kind of being the mainstay that he's been for this club. And I think what I've really been proud of Jordan for is just the maturity and growth that you've seen from him as a keeper. For so long he was kind of known as this error-laden goalkeeper, right? And especially you think of, those were the times that we were doing well, right? So we were almost kind of thinking Pickford as like, he's costing the club points, right? And then for him to kind of really turn it on when the club needed him most. Of course we've talked about it a few times, but him becoming a father, him seeing a sports psychologist, right? Those are things that I feel like you see the maturity on the pitch and you see the calmness, right? And it really takes a really kind of, I think, strong individual to stand up to what he's had to kind of face, whether it be leaky defenses, horrible coaching, just you name it, right? And he deserves as much credit as the Doucourés of the world, the Ghanas of the world, right, for keeping the club the way it is. And, for him to kind of, I think one last thing with him, for him to kind of want to stay here, right, in a time where I think so many people could easily just say, I want to be, he's England's number one, right? And he has been for years now. And so I just wanted to give him a moment of appreciation, because I think he always seems to get undervalued in regards to, and of course, man of the match, like you can only give it to so many people, right? But many performances, I would say a high percentage of those performances, he's been pretty much either good or very good in all of those.
Yeah, and had to deal, of course, as you kind of alluded to, the scrutiny of playing both for Everton, but as England's number one. Just the media there, and can just be absolutely ruthless, and I'm sure it takes a ridiculous toll on your mental. I'm going with current player. I'm going to say, and we're going to keep it current because we could go all time, but we won't. I'm going to go Ghana. I think it's an easy choice for me. One, because he was part of the last time Everton were a competent team. He was a key part of that sort of in his prime. And then he left for PSG, of course. And then he came back under totally different circumstances where he could have had offers elsewhere. And of course, we're paying him quite a bit. But he came back during the darkest depths of Everton and has been our best midfielder for years now. It was like he barely ever left because he hadn't really dropped his levels at all. And a player that I just really appreciate, and I think is finally starting to be recognized just how incredibly pivotal he's been to that, the solidity of the midfield in his time here, his ability, despite his smaller stature, to just disrupt play, make ridiculous tackles. You talk about some of the best defensive midfielders in recent times in the Premier League, and I think he's involved in that conversation, whether other people would agree or not. I think there's no doubt just the involvement he has in play, and a tidy possession player when he's given the opportunity to be one, and he hasn't really had that at Everton. So love Ghana. Just a really solid player all around.
Yeah, and I think one thing I like to add, it's kind of cool to see a full circle moment, right? Him start his career with us. Really, of course, he was with Villa, and then we signed him. One of the only good signings, right? Through that kind of time period, right? And of course, Pickford, we paid massive money for him. I forgot to mention that. And so,
of course,
for him to kind of live up, Ghana was pretty cheap. I think it was $9 million, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, something like that.
And so, of course, totally supported his move to go to PSG and see better things. But to your point, James, usually chapter 2 isn't as good as chapter 1, but I think we'd both say that he's been nothing short of pretty excellent for Everton, even at age 35, right? Which is kind of crazy to think about.
Absolutely. Well, we just have a couple left. Maybe do like a kind of rapid fire for these last ones, because we're getting pretty long in the episode, but if you're still listening, we do really appreciate you. Stephen S. Schuchart? Hopefully I pronounced that correct. Sorry. S. Huchart. Whatever. Sorry, Stephen. Is Beto's scoring run a sign of things to come or a purple patch coming from a playing style more suited to him, a la DCL under Carlo? You take a stab at that one first, Sean.
Sure. I think the conversion rate is going to go down. Like, it has to. He has been nothing short of incredible in regards to the chances he's had before the Brentford game. And I think the Brentford game is just, kind of reverting to the mean a bit, right? So, like I said, I wasn't really too upset outside of that first chance, when we go listen to that pod, because I think it was a really good discussion in regards to Beto, pretty measured by all of us. In terms of a playing style more suited to him, I just think he's getting good service, right? And I think if you wanted to say he's getting more 1v1 chances, right, that's probably, I think, a good analysis in that's where his strength is, right? To where, if you were thinking about DCL, you'd want to get him more headers and kind of one-touch finishes, right? So I don't think where Beto would do as well. So I do think he's not going to keep the scoring spree up, but if he is starting every game the rest of the way, I don't see any reason why he can't be a double-digit goal scorer. So
yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, I don't think this is super sustainable, but I think in a functioning attacking unit, he can play a key role and score a lot of goals. I don't think it will always be super consistent, but I think we'll see closer to what we've seen in the last few games than the limitations we saw in his early days at Everton, for sure. Last but not least, I just want to include this because I think it's funny, and I'm sorry in advance, Cedric Sterling, who asked, I'm sorry you couldn't ask this question to Ryan because I'm sure this is who it's directed to. Is it finally becoming apparent that the director of football role is having little to no value for clubs? This is kind of Cedric's bit with Ryan, I think, where he constantly kind of needles Ryan for being such an advocate of the DOF and just says it's a terrible model and it makes no sense. But no, I don't agree with that, Cedric. In all seriousness, I think it does have a lot of value if implemented correctly. We just haven't seen Everton do that. So sorry to not give you a better answer, but Ryan would have flown off the handle. I just know it.
Yeah, I think Ryan absolutely would have flown off the handle, especially on a day like today. So I think strategically, Ryan probably made the right move, just because we would probably have to make a few edits. But no, to your point, James, I posted an article on my personal Twitter, and it goes into kind of Brentford's DOF, Phil Giles, that really kind of talks about the DOF and kind of how it operates under Brentford and the relationship he has with Thomas Frank. And I think that's a really good kind of microcosm of just kind of what a healthy structure should be. But Cedric, if you want the question answered, you should just put a poll up. So I'll just leave it at that. Really appreciate the questions. Like I said, and I think James would echo, we really can't appreciate the community enough. I mean, in full force within an hour, I think we had about 15 to 20 questions, of course, all in good fun. And so please give us feedback too. If you like a segment like this, please let us know. We'll do some in the future, but if we rambled too much, give us that feedback too. We're open to all and any criticisms, because at the end of the day, we want to put the best product out for you guys.
100%. This is a diesel episode, pushing an hour 30 here. So if you've stuck with us through the whole thing, you're the best. We really do appreciate you. We hope that you enjoyed it. If you're still listening, assume that you did and you're not just hate listening, seething, listening with your headphones in your ears on the train or something. But yeah, appreciate you all. One last request, if you could leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. Really helps us out a ton. I've seen the ratings continue to creep up. So again, that's really helpful for us. Reach out to us with feedback. As I said at the top of the episode, we're super open to doing different types of content and things that you guys would want to see, so let us know. Links in the description for all our socials. Follow us, engage with us, share the episode, all that great stuff. You'll have this same duo with you on Saturday following the match against Wolves. Hopefully another win for David Moyes and the Blues. We'll be with you following that. Until then, up the Toffees.